What's going on, everybody? This is Chris K from the Burning the Red Shirt podcast, as well as Bet on C2C podcast from Campus to Canton. Check us out, both sites. I should say Burning Red Shirt podcast if you haven't already, as well as campustocanton.com. Both have really good content, fun stuff, different stuff as well. But wanted to talk today a little bit about the Tuesday the 8th MACtion DFS slate that's out. So we have 3 games: Eastern Michigan against Akron, Ohio versus Miami, Ohio, and Ball State against Toledo. A little bit split starts here, which could make things tricky based on the pre-game warm-ups, who's dressed, who's not. We saw last week was pretty ridiculous. This should be a little bit better, but it's not. It's still not great. There's some situations that are out there that we don't know about that are going to be huge players in the game. So want to take a look at quarterback to start. Really, I think it's 3 guys and then the rest, the other 3 studs and 3 kind of weird situations / guys I just don't care too much about, right? Starting off with our guy, DEQUAN Finn from Burning the Red Shirt. I should say a huge proponent and fan of DEQUAN Finn is Burning the Red Shirt podcast. But as you see, great rushing usage, finds the end zone a bunch. I mean, his upside's awesome, right? We see some really cool games here, big games. Thing is, didn't play last week. Tucker Gleason filled in for him. We're not going to know for sure who's starting if Finn's available until those pregame festivities. Look what time it starts at, 8 o'clock. That's trouble. But I think the move here is to go with Finn and then always go down to Gleason if you need to. He played well last week, a little bit heavier on the passing game against Eastern Michigan on the road. He's not a bad option at all if he plays, right? So keep this in mind. But Finn's going to be my top guy and Burning the Red Shirt's top guy. I have him at about 27 points projected. I don't think he has that same upside as Curtis Rourke, as we saw last week. Guy was insane against Buffalo. He's just so efficient. He's hard to project because I'm projecting medians, not necessarily projecting the big games. But when you're running for 7.5, 9, 8 yards a carry, makes things a little bit difficult on projections. But what do we see here? 5 passing touchdowns last week against Buffalo, 45 rushing yards. I mean, he does it pretty much all, and he's not insanely expensive. 8,200. We'll see some options at receiver and running back that are really cheap. I think largely they just mispriced Akron all the way around. And that's that third quarterback I consider in that stud tier, DJ Irons. So, I mean, all 3 of these guys, I should say 2 of them are identical in my opinion, right? Irons and Finn, high usage rushing guys, not going to necessarily pop for the huge plays like the Malik Cunningham type, but Rourke is going to produce in the rushing and passing games, but just do it a little bit more efficiently. So we see Irons and Finn with that. Just the usage there. And we see this, right? 49 attempts, 54 attempts. There's no injury concerns here, which is nice. He also has 3 very stackable receiving options that I'll get to in a little bit. But you see a lot of good games here from him. I have him technically as my second best projected quarterback. I think all 3 are just great options. If you can fit them in, you do it. Now, let's talk a little bit of an interesting scenario here with Taylor Powell. I don't know if we really know who's going to be the quarterback here. If it's Powell, I don't really want any piece of this, but I am very interested in Austin Smith. So he's on the cheaper end, which could be really nice because, Finn and Rourke are around that 8K range. I don't think we need to really stress it, but if he is the starter, that does help with some salary relief. Similar kind of guy as Finn and Irons, right? Where we get some good rushing usage and, not necessarily the best passer, but he does have some good passing options. So do like Austin Smith there. Paddock, not really going to mess around with. I mean, his upside's just kind of tanked by Carson Steele is the problem, right? And then I think that's the guys. I think that's all of them. Let's see. Confirm. Yeah. touched on them all. So really, Finn, Rourke, Ian Irons, pick your poison. All three of them great options. Looking at running back, Carson Steele already mentioned him, and the guy's insane. Tons of carries, over 50%. I'd have to look, but maybe even 60, 65% at least rushing usage. And he gets some decent touches in the passing game. So he's going to be really that top running back option alongside Samson Evans. So Samson Evans here is the Eastern Michigan guy against Akron. Good game script. And again, lots of usage. 24 carries. I think Carson Steele is the better running back, but these touchdowns, big touchdown games, when you have, a quarterback controversy of sorts with injuries, Taylor Powell's not the best quarterback, can kind of lead to those big games. He had a big game against Arizona State in that shocking late night win. I consider him a really, really good option. Technically, he's my number one projected running back. But I think things could change because Sia Bangura, he had the almost, we kind of talked about it last week, right? He kind of had the predictable, unpredictable, just didn't play game, right? I think he was actually dressed up to play, but never really looked like he was actually going to go in. So there's a shot they saved him. Maybe just gave him an extra week is probably the better way to say it. And he plays this week. So keep an eye on it. If he does play, this is a really good option. And technically a little bit cheaper than the two previous guys I mentioned. And it's a common theme of MACtion and just really good plays are high rushing usage and high receiving usage. So you see that here, 8 total touchdowns, 6 of which come in the last 4 games. I should say 7 in the last 4 games. So hard not to like him. I will say he comes with the most risk, right? He missed last week, but he also isn't necessarily like a 55, 65% usage guy in terms of the running game. He's closer to that 40 to 50 if we're going to project it. The other guys being, let's see here, Netherton, I believe, was the other one. Wrong team, Ohio. Netherton here. He filled in after McCormick got hurt. So McCormick came in, got hurt. Then it was Netherton. I'm not really interested in McCormick for 5K. If we hear that McCormick and Sia are out, then this is a little bit interesting. I don't think he's the best of plays. These are 2 walk-on guys, McCormick and Netherton. So, technically not the most like star talented type players, but they both looked feasible and playable in MACtion. I'd like Netherton obviously way more at that cheaper price. Other guys to consider, Jaquez Stewart. So this is where we get a little bit cheaper. Okay, so we see Stewart here. Let's see, at 4,100 in that Toledo offense. If Finn doesn't play, does he get a little bit more? Does he get a little bit more carries? Does he need Finn so they move the ball better so he can score? Not a guy I'm going to pound. I'm not going to have a ton of him, but I definitely think he's worth considering just because of the offense. That game could be super high scoring, and he does get double-digit touches. A little bit of action in the passing game here, and he comes at a better price, right? I think we're going to see a lot of high-priced quarterbacks and running backs, so maybe you vary it up a little bit by going cheaper at running back. Other guys to consider, Tyree Shelton, Miami, Ohio. It's just so hard to project these teams that just split carries up, and unless you really watch every game, can you really make sense of it? I'll have a sprinkle of him just because I think he'll get enough usage to warrant it if you make enough lineups. Probably the last guy to consider though here is Clyde Price the third. He's 3K. Akron's running back. I think I have him projected at about 50% of carries. If it's not Irons carrying the ball, it's going to be Price, right? So we see he's not the greatest of running backs, right? 8 for 13 on the season. He's rushing for a whopping 2.6 yards per carry. But if you get, in that 14, 12 carry range, and then look at these receiving numbers just everywhere, right? That's where he's going to make his money. You see his projection or his totals in the past week, month or two. He's definitely produced. I don't love the play, but at 3K and pivoting what people are likely to do, it could make sense to use a little bit of price. A weird potential stack with irons too in that offense. Penny Boone, just real quick to round out a couple of these guys. Penny Boone, not all that interested in. Cam Wiley, let's see here. You know, he's cheap as well for Akron, but I mean, this Akron run game is really bad. So this is just a guy that's going to play, but not really worth using. But yeah, looking at receivers now. So this is where it gets a little interesting, a little fun. There's a ton of options. I think I have maybe 12 or 14 guys projected for 10 points or better. Running back, just for comparison purposes, I have 4. So you see a huge difference there. Sam Wiglis is going to be a top 3 guy for me. We saw how big of a game he had last week. I mean, 2 touchdowns in 3 of the last 4. In that passing game, it's just hard not to love him. He was impressive, and he didn't even hit the volume I think we all thought he was going to hit. My number 1 guy instead is Ja'Shawn Jackson. He had a huge target game. Nice thing is everybody was playing. I thought Hines might not play. Johannes Tyler I thought might not play. He played, but Jackson had 17 targets. So they used him a ton. And this isn't all that atypical. He's got games of 12, 13, 14, 15. I mean, he's averaging 12 targets a game. So huge numbers regardless of who's playing. Other guys in that offense are really pretty good. The second best guy, Tanner New. I probably said that wrong. I apologize, Mrs. New. But he projects well. He hasn't done his best, right? He's got a kind of a tough price here. I really would want Taylor Powell, I think, to actually really like this play, as crazy as it is. So keep an eye on that. I think there is an impact there. And he has performed, right? These are games that Taylor Powell played in. Akron is not the best team, obviously. I think they're like 1-7, although I think some would argue they're one of the best 1-7 teams ever. So I think he's worth considering. All the background data points to him being a really good option. It just hasn't turned out to be that way. Same thing with Mac Hippenhammer. Near identical, right? Just maybe red jersey instead of green jersey, but he needs Brett Gabbert to be the quarterback, which he should be. He's been back, and we see better success for him, right? Gabbert gets hurt, 1 for 5, 2 for 14. Gabbert's back, 5 for 32, 4 for 84. High usage guy. I'm going to pull up his targets here real quick. This is a guy that's getting 7 targets a game. Those last 2 games that I pointed out, 14 and 9 targets. So certainly worth considering. I loved him in the preseason. Nothing's changed except his quarterback hasn't performed. Shockey Jacques Louis, the Pitt transfer, is a very good option, and he's very cheap. So let's talk Akron receivers. Let's just tighten this up a little bit. Go Akron receivers. I'm going to sort it by this because it's so wildly mispriced. There's 3 of them. They're all super cheap, and they're going to be in a good game script. Okay, so Akron's got Shockey Jacques Louis, Alex Adams, and Daniel George. Looking at their numbers so far this year, 9.8, 9.2, 7.3 targets. Last game, the 3 of them had 10, 13, and 13 targets. This is one of those situations, I think, that as the bigger games start to happen, you start to really condense and tighten up who you're actually playing, or I should say throwing to. All 3 of them are really good options. Alex Adams has had 2 insane games in a row. See that there. And he had some other good games too. So it's not like a little spurt there. Jacques Louis, I've already said his name 100 times. I mean, about as consistent as it gets. He had a couple dinkers here, but those are both tougher opponents for Akron. Finally, Daniel George. He seems to be a little bit more targets and not producing as much with them. If the other guys are catching the passes at like 65 to 75% of the time, with Daniel George, it's closer to like 55% of the time, and that's why we see these lower numbers. But still, at 3K, not the worst. And he will, I'm guessing, will be the lowest owned of them all. So I think all three of them are great options there. Going back to just generally speaking, best plays, Jawan Newton, I think, is a really good play. Toledo's conceivably Toledo's number one. I would want Finn to play, of course. You know, when you're going to pay decently for a guy, the expectation is that he has his best quarterback for him. And then who else? Hassan BEYDOUN. Let's see, where is he? Let me go back to salary. BEYDOUN's expensive, but, you know, he's got the big PPR type games. Just hasn't really done it. That Eastern Michigan offense has struggled in the passing game. That's what happens when you don't really have a quarterback. So maybe they pick it up, maybe they don't. I do like BEYDOUN. I just probably won't have a ton of him because quarterback play is sketchy there. Michael Barkley for actually, let's talk Toledo for a second here. I touched on, let's see, I touched on Jawan Newton, but let's take a look overall. This is a struggle, right? This is another injury situation we have to pay attention to, and that would be Blankum. I totally butchered that, but here we are. Demir Blankum is a guy to consider if he's playing, but it does feel like he's going to be out. 0 targets in 3 of his last 4, which means to me, he just didn't play in those 3 games because otherwise he's at, 6, 7, 8 targets. So this is a guy that if he's playing is a really good option, but because he's not, we've seen Michael Barkley step up. Last 2 games, 7 and 9 targets. He's really produced fairly well with them. He's recorded a stat at least in 4 straight. Always a good start. 3 touchdowns in these 4 last games. And this is that correlation here between Blankum out and him in. So worth considering there. So pay attention to that Blankum injury. Let's talk Ball State. So I already touched on Ja'Shawn Jackson. I think Johannes Tyler is not really the best of options. Playable for sure. I just don't know if I'm going to go that route much. Instead, I really like these tight ends. If you watched the Ball State game last week, they used them a ton. They both move really well. This guy's like 6'7", 230. And they throw to both him and Brady Hunt in the red zone as well. So you see a bunch of TDs here for the 2 of them. Hunt's cheaper. I think I like Cozy a little bit more, but this is one of those teams I think if you talk to Moxley and others that watch those games, they kind of rotate them, or Brady Hunt is that tight end 1. I just maybe caught Cozy on a really good day where they really focused in on him. Who did I miss? Let's see. I think I got about all of them. Dylan Drummond is another Eastern Michigan guy that's a little bit expensive for not really doing a whole lot. So somebody worth considering, but not in a ton of lineups by any means. Miles Marshall, I believe that's the Indiana transfer. He's had some big target games. So this Western Michigan game, you saw a bunch of targets. I think there's just a lot of options in this slate to not have to go that way. So let's build a lineup. Let's just play it safe and say that Finn is questionable or sketchy, so we're not going to use him. So we'll go Irons and Rourke. Let's go Carson Steele because he's insanely good. Samson Evans. Now let's go cheap. Let me go Wigless. Now let's go cheap. So maybe Jacques Louis with Adams. This is going to be potentially a chalky line, but look how easy this just got, right? Like now I have a bunch of different options. I could go with Hippenhammer here and kind of not stack Rourke. Actually, no, I have Wigless, but I'm not double stacking that side of things. But I do have like the run back of sorts with Hippenhammer against them. And Samson Evans being that like touchdown guy for EMU. Totally possible there. Let's clear that out. Maybe now let's change it up a little bit and go I don't know. Let's say Gleason is the quarterback. They say that Finn's out. So in this scenario, I don't know if I like Toledo receivers as much. I still want to go Wigless. I mean, it's just going to be hard to vary what we're doing here. So maybe go Stewart and think that they're going to just dump it down. He's going to be a benefit there. Carson Steele's awesome. So let's do that. Ja'Shawn Jackson. I mean, look how much salary is left for 2 spots, right? Like even if you did do that, you could go Jerwan Newton there if you wanted and still have enough maybe to see here. Kind of puts you in a no man's land of sorts because you can't get Hippenhammer, but you kind of get the idea. I think there's a bunch of different routes to get to where you want to be. Maybe go, let's see, instead of Newton, be Shockey again. And then you can pretty much get whoever you want. Evans, Bangura, you know, maybe if you don't do Rourke, you do Bangura and Wigless. Kind of see if you can take advantage of that situation. But just some ideas, just some thoughts. Remember, guys to think about, keep an eye on would be Daquan Finn. Sia Bangura, is he going to play? Blankham C from Toledo. Those are some bigger names for sure to keep an eye on. And then Eastern Michigan, who's going to be their quarterback? Make sure Brett Gabbert's going to be playing. He's missed games in the past. You never know with MACtion, but he should be good, but you never know. So just some different things to think about. Hope everybody enjoys the slate. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long for you guys, but hope everybody gets to enjoy it. And I'll see you guys on the other side.